At first there was only Ginnungagap, vast, silent, and eternal. It was not a silence we know, but a silence so deep it seemed to swallow the idea of sound itself. Imagine standing in a place where there is no wind, no echo, no sense of direction, only a vast and infinite nowhere. For countless ages, Ginnungagap simply was a gaping void stretching in all directions, untouched and unshaped. But even in that endless stillness, change was waiting, patient and inevitable. Far to the north, Niflheim was stirring. This was the realm of mist and ice, ancient even in the beginning. There, frost storms roared endlessly, and venomous rivers flowed from the wellspring of Ymir, their icy waters carrying the chill of death. Niflheim was a land that bit and burned with cold, a place where frost giants would one day make their homes. But in those first moments, it was simply a churning sea of frozen chaos, pressing against the edge of the void. Far to the south burned Muspelheim, a world of pure fire. Imagine it, flames roaring without wood or fuel, heat so fierce it could ignite the air, light so bright it hurt to behold. At the heart of this fiery realm stood Surtur, the fire giant, wielding a sword of flame that burned hotter than any forge. The land itself crackled and blazed, a place of eternal conflagration, and its heat radiated outward, pushing against the nothingness. And so it was that Ginnungagap, once still and empty, began to change. Slowly, the freezing breath of Niflheim and the unbearable heat of Muspelheim crept toward each other. They met in the center of the void, where the rime frost began to melt and drip, hissing as it touched the warmth. The drops fell, heavy and alive, pooling together until something miraculous happened. From that mingling of extremes, ice and fire, death and life, emerged the first heartbeat. Ymir. The first of all living things opened his eyes. He was massive, far beyond the scale of any creature that would ever follow, a being shaped by the chaos around him. His breath was cold wind, his footsteps thunder across the formless floor of Ginnungagap. He was the progenitor of the frost giants, though there were no others yet, only him standing in the infinite darkness. His body radiated the primal energy of creation itself. He was not made for peace. He was raw, elemental, a child of both frost and flame. But even a creature so great cannot exist alone forever. From the same melting ice came another living being, and she was unlike anything Ymir could have imagined. Auðhumla, the great cosmic cow, stepped forth from the rime, her hide gleaming white as fresh snow, her eyes calm and patient. She was immense, her presence gentle and nourishing, as if the void itself had decided that Ymir must not starve. 4 rivers of milk flowed from her udders, and Ymir drank deeply, his strength growing with each swallow. But Auðhumla had her own rhythm, her own quiet work to do. She licked the salty blocks of ice for sustenance, scraping them clean with her great tongue. Day after day she licked, and with each pass, something began to emerge from the ice. At first it was only the outline of hair, then a face, then the shape of a man. By the 3rd day the figure stepped free from the ice entirely. This was Búri, the first of the gods. He was tall, powerful, and beautiful, glowing with a light that no creature of Ginnungagap had ever seen before. He stood upright, a vision of strength and order, as though destiny itself had carved him from the ice. Búri would later have a son, Bor, and Bor would take for his wife Bestla, a giantess, binding together the blood of gods and giants. From this union came 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Vi, who would one day shape the destiny of all the 9 realms. Yet for now there was still no sun, no moon, no stars, only the vast emptiness of Ginnungagap and the slow stirring of life within it. Ymir, meanwhile, was not done bringing forth his strange children. One night as he slept, his body sweated in the heat that still rolled off Muspelheim's breath. From the sweat of his left armpit came 2 new beings, a man and a woman, the first of the frost giants. And from one of his legs, another son sprang forth, born without mother or father. Ymir's very flesh was fertile, and from him spread the Jotnar, the first great race of beings who would fill the empty void with noise and motion. The giants were powerful and fierce, embodying the raw chaos from which they were born. They clashed, they roared, they shaped the emptiness with their sheer presence. It was a world before order, before law, before there was a place for men or gods. And yet, even as the giants multiplied, a subtle tension began to rise. For among them were now Búri's descendants, the first gods. These young gods grew in strength and wisdom, inheriting not the chaos of Ymir but something different, the will to shape, to order, to bring meaning to the void. Odin, in particular, grew quickly into a figure of cunning and power, his mind always turning, his thoughts reaching toward what might yet be. The more the gods grew, the more they looked upon Ymir and the giants with wary eyes. Ymir was not simply a creature. He was the very embodiment of the old world, of wildness and danger. Wherever he walked, more giants came forth, and soon their numbers were countless. To the young gods, it seemed that chaos was multiplying faster than they could contain it. If there was ever to be a world where balance could exist, where order might hold sway, something would have to be done. But that decision would not come easily, for Ymir was their ancestor too, and his blood ran in their veins through Bestla, their mother. The thought of killing him was terrible, unthinkable even, but the thought of letting chaos reign unchecked was worse. And so a storm began to gather, not of wind and rain, but of destiny itself. The void, which had once been silent, now throbbed with the tension between these two forces: chaos and order, giant and god, ancestor and descendant. And one day the tension would break. The tension that had been building could no longer be contained. Ymir was vast and his children were everywhere. To the young gods, it seemed that every moment brought new giants roaring into existence, as if chaos itself was multiplying faster than they could ever hope to control. The void no longer felt empty, it was crowded, heavy, filled with a wild and dangerous energy that threatened to drown out the fragile spark of order the gods represented. Odin, Vili, and Vi looked out over the expanse of Ginnungagap and saw the future that awaited them if they did nothing. The Jotnar would rule everything. The young gods would be swallowed by the endless tide of chaos, and there would be no place to build, no place for harmony, no place for the beauty that Odin's heart longed to bring into existence. It was then that a terrible decision was made. They would have to confront Ymir. It was not a choice made lightly. Ymir was, after all, the source of all life, the primal father of their mother's people. To raise a weapon against him was to strike at the root of their own existence. But the gods were resolute. They gathered their courage, took up their weapons, and set out to face the giant. The battle that followed was unlike anything the void had ever seen. Imagine Ginnungagap, once still and silent, now shaken by the clash of forces so great they could tear reality apart. Ymir's footsteps were like avalanches, his roars like thunder rolling through an endless night. The young gods moved quickly, darting beneath him, striking with divine strength and cunning. The struggle went on, filling the void with sound and fury. At last Ymir staggered. The final blow was struck and the first giant fell. When he hit the ground, the very fabric of Ginnungagap seemed to shudder. Then came the flood, Ymir's blood, pouring out in a terrible deluge, a tide so vast that it drowned almost every one of his descendants. The rivers of blood swept them away, crushing and suffocating, until the chaos that had so threatened to overwhelm the young gods was nearly extinguished. But not entirely. Bergelmir, grandson of Ymir, and his wife managed to escape, finding refuge at the edge of the world. They climbed onto a strange object. Some say a hollow tree trunk, some say a chest, and rode it like a boat through the sea of blood until they reached safety. From them would come the future race of giants, who would never forget what the gods had done. When the floodwaters at last receded, silence returned to Ginnungagap. But it was no longer the soft silence of the beginning. This was a heavier quiet, a stillness that smelled of iron and death. Ymir's vast body lay motionless, and the three brothers stood looking down at what they had done. They had won, but victory brought with it an even greater challenge. What now? They could not simply leave the corpse where it lay. Ymir was too large, too powerful, and too dangerous to be left to rot. But Odin saw something more than danger. Where his brothers saw a fallen foe, Odin saw potential. Ymir's body was not only an end but also a beginning. The brothers worked together, and what they did next would shape all that was to come. They dragged Ymir's massive form to the very center of Ginnungagap. There, piece by piece, they began to transform him. From his flesh, they formed the land itself, spreading it wide to make plains and valleys. His bones they shaped into mountains, jagged and sharp, so that they might hold up the sky. His teeth, along with the splinters of his broken bones, became stones and pebbles scattered across the earth. His blood, still flowing in great pools, was gathered to make seas, lakes, and rivers. What had nearly drowned the world was now made to nourish it. The brothers let the waters flow, carving channels so that the land would be divided, and life might one day flourish on its banks. Then they turned their gaze upward. They took Ymir's skull and raised it high, forming the vault of the heavens. To keep it from falling, they placed 4 beings, strange and stout, the first dwarves, at each corner, naming them north, south, east, and west. These 4 were tasked with holding up the sky, and they have done so ever since. But the heavens could not remain empty. The brothers gathered the sparks that flew from Muspelheim and flung them into the dark, setting them alight as stars. Some they placed to move across the sky, becoming the sun and moon, to mark the passage of day and night. For the first time there was light, and the world glowed with a strange and holy radiance. The gods worked tirelessly. They took Ymir's hair and spread it across the land, and from it sprang the grasses and forests. His mighty eyebrows they used to build a wall, a great protective barrier, and within this enclosure they created Midgard, the middle realm, a safe place where mortals would one day live. Still they were not done. They looked down at their new world and saw that it was beautiful but empty. There were no creatures to walk the land, no birds to fly the air, no fish to swim the waters. So they filled it. From the sparks of life still lingering in the void, they made animals to roam the forests, beasts to stalk the mountains, and birds to fill the air with song. The rivers ran clear, and the stars reflected on their surfaces like tiny fires. And yet, for all its beauty, something was missing. The world was full, but it was silent, lacking voices to wonder at its beauty. That, however, would be a task for later. For now, the brothers looked upon their work and saw that it was good. They had turned chaos into order, emptiness into fullness, and death into life. But as they gazed across the world, they could not escape the memory of what it had cost. The soil beneath their feet was Ymir's flesh, the mountains his bones, the seas his blood. Even the winds that blew across the plains seemed to carry his last sigh. The gods knew that what they had done would not go unanswered. Somewhere, Bergelmir and his wife were raising children, and those children would carry the memory of this slaughter. And so the world was born not in peace but in blood, its foundations built on the death of the first giant. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also tragic, and its fate would always carry the shadow of its violent birth. Even the gods, in their triumph, must have felt the weight of what they had done. Creation was complete, but their story was only beginning. The stage was set, the world was ready, and soon, it would be filled with beings whose deeds would echo across eternity. And somewhere far away the descendants of Ymir were watching, waiting, and planning for the day when they would have their revenge. The struggle between gods and giants had begun, and it would not end until the last day, when all things would burn and the world itself would be remade. But that is a tale for another time. So next time you look at a mountain or stand at the edge of the sea, remember that you are standing on the body of the first giant. Remember that the very world we walk on was forged from conflict, that life itself was carved out of chaos. And perhaps, just perhaps, you will feel a chill, not from the wind but from the memory of Ymir, still lingering in the stones and rivers, reminding us that creation is never gentle, and that even beauty comes at a cost. If you enjoyed this journey into the birth of the cosmos, give this video a like to help others find it, subscribe to explore more Norse mythology with us, and let me know in the comments. If you were one of the gods, would you have made the same choice?